Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today we are taking a look at a zero tolerance. This is the 0900. This is a Les George collaboration, and you know what? I've been pretty impressed with the zero tolerance Les George collabs, and this guy is no exception. So I'm really happy that I've been able to carry this around a bit, do some testing with it, and just check it out because it is a thoroughly enjoyable knife to use and carry. And the person I need to thank for that is Scott, or Real Bush Monkey EDC on Instagram. And if you're not following him, you really want to. And by the way, if you're a Spyderco fan, he has a crazy Spyderco collection, guys. So go ahead and check out his Instagram feed. I think you'll really be impressed. Now, let's get back to the knife. This knife, as I said, is not a knife that I would get to check out. As you guys know, I'm a big fan of larger knives. You know, usually I like stuff that's 8 inches minimum and up. And so this is, you know, right in my wheelhouse, right? What we have here is a knife that is 6 5/8 inches overall, 2 3/4 inch blade, 3 7/8 on the handle. Now here's one number that is normal, okay? So I guess this is where this knife tries to sort of redeem itself. You know, normally I like knives that are bigger than this. So in order to make up for that, 4.4 ounces is the weight on this knife. Now, for a knife of this size, that is crazy, guys. You know, I think the reason that they had to make it so small is because if it was a full-size knife, it would weigh like 30 pounds. But yeah, this is a hefty little knife. Now, thankfully, it's so small because that weight doesn't really matter. And I've carried this knife and find it absolutely comfortable to carry. And so I'm not complaining at all about the weight. But on the, what would you say, on the ounces to length ratio, this knife is really not doing all that well, if anyone's counting. Okay, now let's talk about the blade. The blade is one of the things that I really like about this knife. I like thicker, bigger, heavier blades, and certainly this is that. Of course, the length is not, but it's a nice thick piece of S35 VN with a stonewash finish, pretty high flat grind, nice clip point going on here with a little swedge. So really nice looking blade. Now here's the challenge. And you know, I kind of look at a knife like this and I look at the blade stock and I go, you know, I bet you this knife won't slice. However, it actually does really well. This grind, it's thin enough behind the edge and the grind here is gradual enough that it performs pretty nicely in, you know, those kind of day-to-day slicing tasks. Cutting up an apple or a tomato or slicing pieces of cheese for your sandwich or something works just fine for that kind of stuff. And I've got to give a lot of credit to ZT for that. And let me say, normally ZT is pretty good about this. I haven't had too many. I'm trying to think. Yeah, really, the 0560 was one of their thicker bladed knives, and even it cut moderately well. So in terms of actual performance, yeah, S35 VN, so it's going to be nice and corrosion resistant. It's going to hold an edge nicely, and it's going to do all the stuff that you want your knife to do, so long as you don't need a whole lot of blade length to do it with, okay? And that's, of course, the one point that would kind of keep me away from this knife. Now, let's move on to the action, because again, the action is pretty stinking impressive. Really nice, firm detent on this guy, pretty typical for ZT. Now this is a knife you're going to want to keep your fingers off of the lock bar. You can still deploy the knife. So if I put a little pressure on the lock bar, see, I can still deploy it, but it's definitely harder. And if I were to consistently do that, my finger would start to feel a little uncomfortable, no question. As it is, now the nice thing is, even if you're not thinking about it, the design of the knife, here's how I kind of end up naturally holding it, and my fingers are not on the lock bar. They're kind of back here doing this type of thing. So that is pretty nice. The lock bar is easy to access. You do have a stainless steel liner lock in there, or I mean a stainless steel lock bar insert. Sorry, I'm unable to speak there for a second. And if you look closely, you can kind of see, I don't know if I can show it to you or not. Well, yeah, it does also serve as an over travel stop, okay? The flipper tab is well jimped and easy to get a hold of. It light switches really well. I'm not sure how it naturally light switches. Push button is really difficult because the knife is too short for me to kind of move my hand down to where it needs to be. But yeah, it's definitely a knife that wants to be light switched. Action, again, so pretty typical ZT action. The one complaint I do have is this knife will catch on the detent ball. So right there, see how I've unlocked the knife, but the blade tang is actually hitting, you can kind of hear it there. So the blade tang there is actually hitting the detent ball. And so I need to just kind of move it a little bit, move my thumb down and get it past that detent ball to shut the knife. If you owned this knife and you were using it all the time, you would get used to kind of where you need to put your thumb to get it to work, but it is a little annoying. And I kind of wish companies would pay a little more attention to that. From time to time it happens. So, I mean, it's not the worst thing that could ever happen. The knife still functions fine, it still deploys fine. And even if you, okay, there now I see I haven't gotten it past the detent, but you can give it a little push and it will go past that detent without too much difficulty. A ramp would be appreciated to kind of deal with that little problem, and then you wouldn't have to move the detent ball. You could just kind of easily slide past it. So yeah, action is very good. No complaints whatsoever about the action on this knife. It's firm, it's fast, it's satisfying. This is a super fun knife to sort of play around with and fondle while you're watching TV or whatever. And finally, let's talk about the handle. And again, the handle is a big win. Again, I would take one look at this knife and go, yeah, it's kind of a 3-finger knife and I hate that and it's not going to be big enough to be comfortable for me. But then when you get it in hand and you realize because this kind of extends a little bit, I can get my finger on here and it actually feels pretty good. So although I don't absolutely love it, and if you had really big hands, I take a size large glove. I have reasonably large hands, but if you had like huge NBA basketball player type hands, you know, maybe this would be like a 2-finger knife and you'd be really struggling with it. In that case, you know, go to a 0.560. But for most people, I think this is going to be pretty darn comfortable in hand. Certainly for me, who's, by the way, someone who doesn't like small knives specifically because they're not hand filling enough. This works really, really well. So, you know, let's kind of move on past the ergonomics and talk about construction. You can see it's, you know, pillar standoff construction, no lanyard spot. Although if you take a look in here, so with the blade closed, there is enough space in there that you could put a lanyard around the back standoff there, and I think you'd be okay. If you tightened it up enough to kind of keep it away from the blade, I think it would be fine. Again, I'm not a lanyard guy, so I don't really care about that. Of course, big thick slabs of titanium. So in terms of the way they've constructed this knife, I have no issue whatsoever. Again, pretty typical ZT level of quality. Nice milling here. The one thing I will say from an aesthetic standpoint, this knife looks really attractive. And I like the fact that the blade is pretty sterile. I mean, it's still got a little bit of writing here, but it's not, especially on the show side, it's very understated. And I think that's really, really classy on ZT's part, just to tone down that bannering a little bit. So I want to give them a little bit of credit for that aspect as well. Let's go ahead and get to some comparisons. Oh, I should have mentioned the clip. It does have a 2-position clip. You can put it here or here. It is the sort of Kershaw ZT fold over clip that we're used to seeing, and it does have the same issues that they usually have. So because of these 2 screws, it can be a little tough to get this all the way into your pocket. And anyone who's, you know, seen a review of any number of zero tolerance knives, including, I have 2 knives sitting on the table with this that have the same clip. I'll show you in a second when we get to comparisons, but I think we're all pretty used to that clip and we're used to its limitations. All right, so moving on now to comparisons. I don't have a lot that I can compare to this knife. I've got the Cold Steel Con with basically a 3-inch blade, and so it's kind of around the same size. It's a little, it does have room for my pinky, see, so I do kind of like that. And of course, these are not in the same ballpark at all, although, you know, the Triad Lock is going to be quite strong for you. I do also have the WE 605, another knife that is way too small for me, but which, you know, I was fortunate enough to have Zelric send along for review. And actually, again, I've been pretty impressed with this knife. I wouldn't buy it, but pretty darn good. Let's throw in, so those are the 2 sort of smaller knives that I have. Let's throw in the other ZT Les George knives. There is the 0920. There is the 0909, and there is the 0900. And you can see the 909 and the 900 are very similar. And so, you know how I'm often saying in reviews, hey, I wish someone made a larger version of this knife. Well, the 909 is probably about the closest thing you're going to get. And I've got to, you guys, if you've seen my review, you know I love this knife as well. There is, of course, this year's Les George collab, and it is an epically good knife. And so, again, pretty darn impressed with that one. What else have we got? Oh, I should bring a Para 2 in here just because everyone's sort of familiar with the Para 2 in terms of size. And I'll bring in one more knife. I got this because it has the same clip, the fold over Kershaw clip. This is, of course, the Kershaw Launch. No, it's not. This is the Kershaw Knockout. I don't know what I'm saying there. And this happens to be the Damascus bladed one, and it's not very attractive Damascus, but this to me is a pretty small knife. This is about as small as I like to go. So you can see that this is way smaller than that, okay? So what's my overall take on this knife? Well, listen, for a small knife, this knife is a real joy. I have really, really liked getting to kind of play with it and carry it and use it a little bit. In terms of as small knives go, this is probably about the most interesting one and the most attractive one that I am aware of. I'm sure there's others out there that I haven't tried because, you know, I kind of write them off being too small. But I've got to say this one is pretty darn impressive. And if you're liking a knife of this size, or if you live in a part of the world, you know, maybe you love Les George, you love zero tolerance, but barely anything they make, you know, if you'd love to have this knife, but it's going to get you thrown in jail where you live, hey, this is a great option. I think the other cool thing about this knife is if you're traveling, you know, let's say you're going to be passing through multiple states, or you live in Europe and you're going to be passing through multiple countries on a car trip, and the knife laws are going to be changing as you go. This probably fits the bill in a lot of places because it's fairly small. Not too many people are going to freak out about it. I guess the one last thing, if you work in an office with a bunch of sheeple and you don't want to upset them by carrying your big knife, again, great option, okay? Because you're getting all of that. You're still getting a hard use knife. You're still getting a knife that gives you a lot of pride of ownership, and it's pretty unique and well built. But it's not so big that anyone's going to freak out over it. So I've got to say, guys, this is a real win for zero tolerance. Again, it's not my favorite knife, but man, I can imagine how this could definitely be a lot of people's favorite knife. So there you go. That's my overall take. Absolutely love this knife. Highly recommended. Again, too small for me, but wow, great knife. Very, very well done. Talk to you soon. Don't forget to like and subscribe.